Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Always Right podcast. I am Chris Thomas. This is Terry, and we have Raven on here again. I know he's a fan favorite, so everybody,
Who
everybody,
doesn't
We have
love
fans?
me?
and now this is one of the most racially diverse panels. In case there's any DEI Nazis watching, we have a very diverse panel today, and
Yeah,
we're
we
going to talk about some cool stuff. We're going to have a great discussion about Islam, because we all know that there's a double standard out there as we battle these pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas terrorist lovers. They always seem to have it out for Christianity, but they seem to not have any issue with the peaceful religion of Islam. So we're going to dissect these religions today and see which religion should piss off the wokies more. I'm one of
It's
the
definitely as a Christian, I can say it's definitely Christianity. So
Yeah, as
I'll
a
be speaking
Catholic,
on
I will
behalf of
say it's
Christians.
Christianity.
So
Yes,
we have some unique perspectives here. Terry had common sense her whole life, all 21 years
That's
of it.
true.
However,
15 years of it.
no, Raven and I are former stupid leftists. And so we've been on both sides of this fence. So we're gonna pretend we're woke again so we can really dissect what's going on here. So let's do a little outline before we go in. What do woke people stand? First of all, Terry, what do you think woke people stand for? I'm curious what you're
Why
whining.
no. So look, I think that from what I hear is wokeness is the need to be aware of injustices and if you are contributing to them. Now, as
Yeah.
far as I know, it doesn't mean you need to do anything about those injustices or take responsibility for any of your actions, but you should be aware that these things are going on. That
Now,
is my and you have to hate white people,
Oh,
especially
yeah.
white women. Yeah,
I would
Or
agree. So
that's my
cis
understanding.
straight white men.
I think
Yeah.
it's awareness and also who cries the loudest, because the people who get most recognized, they don't produce anything, but they whine the loudest. So, what
Mhm.
topics do they whine about? We're going to dissect 4 topics tonight and talk about what the different religious perspectives are between Islam and Christianity. We'll see which religion is more problematic to woke people, and we're going to we're going to move through the topics of peace versus violence, the evil patriarchy,
Ugh.
LGBT, LMNOPQ rights, and race. And we're going to see
Well,
which religion. Yes.
and I think Chris too, and to chime in that's also a look at how our civilizations also handle things, because
Exactly.
Western civilization is founded on, driven, has come from a place of Judeo-Christian values, even though we're not a theocracy. We were not founded
Even though we
on a
should be.
particular
Even though we should
religion.
be. Just saying.
No. And same with
Submit to
Europe, although at
Rome.
one time they had some theocracies. And the Middle East is actually driven, their culture is very, well, it is based on their religion,
Yep.
right? I mean, they are Islamic states and they say that. So this also is a reflection of the civilization that is happening in relation to these beliefs and how they've built a civilization based on what, you wokies see and think
Exactly.
and whine about. And whine
Exactly.
about.
So let's talk first about peace, because one of the things you hear a lot from these pro-Palis and from Muslim apologists is Islam is truly a religion of peace. Any suggestion otherwise is a dirty, racist, colonial stereotype, and not true at all. But that Christianity is a religion of hatred and violence. Islam is a religion of peace. So let's talk about it.
Well,
Okay.
I want to say, so first of all,
Yes.
Chris, what cracks me up is if you say anything about Islam, people call you a racist, and I'm like, Islam is a religion, it's not a race. But people say that. But I think the other thing, and I think you have to preface this with any religion.
Yeah.
Anybody can take a religion and claim to do something in the name of that religion.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
But it's how do the followers react to that? And the example I would give for Christianity is, gosh, this must have been in the 90s. I heard about it. Of course, I wasn't there. That a person blew up an abortion clinic, right? And the church and Christians in America, that are the society, the group, came out and condemned him. right? Everybody was,
Mhm.
this is wrong. You shouldn't have done this. You took lives. We
Yeah.
value lives. And they criticized and condemned that behavior.
Because
However, if we look at terrorist organizations, 9/11, October 7th, the bombings of the embassies in Kenya, there is celebration from the people who follow that religion that is
exactly.
not widely condemned. And so I want to make it, just because somebody says I'm doing this in the name of Christianity or Islam doesn't necessarily mean that they represent that religion. But let's look at how their followers respond to that, because then
Exactly.
that's actually what represents the religion. How did the followers respond to it?
And
So
Terry,
Exactly.
that's
So,
the thing, because you even know what I'm like. You know how anti-abortion I am, and not even I would do something or condone
mhm.
something like that. I would have been one of the first people to condemn that. Absolutely
Well,
not.
because you're still ending a life,
well, and here's
right?
the other thing. For the same reason you would say you don't you don't have a moral authority to end a baby's life because of what a rapist does. You don't
Mhm.
have the moral authority to end an abortionist's life or a woman getting
Exactly.
an abortion because of what
Exactly.
their intent might be. It's
Mhm.
simply you're taking a life you're taking lives that are collateral damage that shouldn't be taken. So I think
Yes.
that's a great point, and I want to get to kind of the brass tacks of it, Terry. What does the Christian Bible or Judeo-Christian teaching say
Mhm. The Catholic
about?
Bible is the only real one.
I got you.
Not
What
for the purposes of
I
this
have to
podcast. So,
what
I think when in there, so you have to. One of the things people have to understand, a lot of people always refer back to in the Old Testament. Blah, blah. Okay, that's fine,
Mhm.
but really, the Old Testament is the Old Covenant with God, and the
Yeah.
New Testament is the New Covenant with God. And so you cannot compare the relationship that mankind had with God in the Old Testament with the relationship that mankind has available to God in the New Testament. And that is because if you believe in Christianity, he sent his son to die in our place for our sin
Mhm.
and then allowed us to have a personal relationship with him.
Exactly.
So we look
Because
at the
before
New
you had to go in
Testament.
temples.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
in the New Testament,
Mhm.
there's no go to war or fight any. I mean, God isn't doing the same battles that
Nope.
we had in the Old Testament. And
And
I
there's no
always look
theocracy,
to,
unfortunately.
yeah. So I look, I always look at when Jesus was asked, what is the new law? There were a ton of laws to follow in the Old Testament because you were trying to make sure that you were following and trying to be holy because
Mhm.
God's forgiveness was not readily available without your own sacrifice.
Exactly.
And
And
what
Jesus was
Jesus
the
said
last
to the
sacrifice.
Pharisees, yeah, the
Mhm.
Pharisees and the Sadducees was follow the 10 commandments and love your neighbor as yourself. So if you look at the 10 commandments, they're about self-governing, how we behave and treat other people. Don't lie to people, don't steal from people, don't have an affair with their neighbor, those types of things.
Mhm.
And love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus even says that if somebody wrongs you, forgive them 7 times, 70 times 7, even in an hour. So Christianity is a religion of peace. There
It
is
is.
nothing in the New Testament, while it says be prepared for war, right? That you should buy a sword and
Mhm.
be prepared to fight. You don't go out and search for a fight. And when Peter, one of Jesus's disciples, cut off a man's ear, a Roman soldier who came to crucify Christ, take him to be crucified, Jesus stopped Peter and healed him. So the
Right.
idea that Christianity is
Mhm.
this violent religion is absurd because
Well,
there's nothing in the New Testament that suggests that.
I
Exactly.
want to circle back since I was, I guess, one of the recent wokies that woke up a little bit. I want to talk about a common argument that you hear about the Old Testament
Mhm.
from kind of religion hating
Mhm.
atheists. Go ahead.
Oh, and also, because I want to add two more things. Just one thing, real
Sure.
quick. Yeah, the
Go ahead.
interesting thing is, in the Old Testament, it's like God's law was like synonymous with, the legal law, because the Israelites were their own distinct
Correct.
thing from everyone else. But in the New Covenant, in the New Testament, well, same thing. The God's law is actually separate from the legal law. And this is made clear in Romans
Correct.
13 when he says, to obey the laws made by man. So I'm like, that's a clear thing that the legal laws and God's law are two very separate things now, that we're no longer in the Old Covenant. And also another thing,
Yeah, absolutely.
talking about the Old Testament, this reminds me of a funny interaction I had, because like some girl saw me talking about like abortion, from a biblical perspective, and she was like, "Well, you have piercings. Leviticus right here says that you can't do that." And I'm like, "Well, that would be relevant if only I was an Old Testament Jew. I'm a Christian
Right.
here."
Right.
And one of the
But you're
things,
right. And that's why, Raven, we can't have a theocracy because it very
Mhm.
clearly says that the law of man is
Unfortunate.
separate from the law of God. And again, this would be a counterpoint because in Islam, the law of the Quran is the law of the land,
Oh yeah,
Sharia law.
So
Sharia law.
There
one of
is
the
no
things,
separation.
I'm
I
so
want,
sad. Nobody can submit to Rome.
so one of the things that you often hear lefties saying about Christianity is that they'll cite events that happened in the Old Testament and
Mhm.
say because this happened in the Bible, that means that's endorsed by Christianity. They'll say murder happened in the Bible, rape happened in the Bible, and they'll use
Mhm.
that as this is what you guys as Christians you like that stuff.
My personal favorite is God flooded the world, so that means that murder is okay in any
Right,
circumstance.
they'll say genocide. Yeah, genocide is embraced because God genocided humanity.
But
That's what you hear.
here's the thing, and so and people say this a lot. And one of the things that is unique to Christianity that is different from other religions is that most religions, God reflects man's behavior, right?
Mhm.
So you will see in gods that were created that they are jealous the way a human is jealous. They lust the way a human lusts. They murder the way a human, they have hatred the way. But in Christianity, the belief is that God is a perfect being and we are an imperfect reflection of him.
Genesis
And
1:27.
right. And so in the Old Testament, you're talking about a perfect being dealing with imperfect individuals, and you are talking about a perfect being deciding what justice is. And that's the
Mhm.
difference. We're looking at it, and this
Exactly.
is part of faith with Christianity that is hard.
Mhm.
We are finite, our minds are limited.
Mhm.
But if you believe in God, you know that he is unlimited. And so a lot of what they're looking at when they're it was murder, it was
Mhm.
this was justice decided by a
It was.
divine God whose mind you
Mhm.
cannot clearly understand.
Exactly.
And I'm not saying that's always an easy thing to accept, but there is divine retribution. And because there was not a sacrifice, there was not forgiveness in the Old Testament, that
Mhm.
is how things were dealt with. That is why the
Exactly.
new covenant and Jesus' sacrifice is so important. So it's not that we condone it, but you're looking at it as I'm a human and this is what I would do. However, God is not a reflection of you. You are an
Mhm.
imperfect and flawed reflection of him.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So
And
you're judging him by your standard. Your standard is way below his,
exactly.
right?
Even Terry, adding on to that, I've had this conversation with like people that are like, I'm not gonna say atheist, more like anti-theistic than anything. And we've talked about
Mm-hmm.
this, and I'm just like, see, this is the part you're failing to understand. You may have like read the Bible or whatever, but this is the part you're failing to understand. God is not a reflection of you. You are a reflection of
Right.
Him, and you are imperfect. If you look at what God does and you think that is wrong, you're wrong. That you are not understanding His mind or His thought process. If you think anything He did is even somewhat wrong, you're wrong. Because
Yes, but you have to look at it as a shortcoming. And I think this is a good another thing when they talk about Islam versus Christianity is that this is another case where this is a God who reflects human characteristics,
Allah, yeah,
not the other way around.
Allah reflects human characteristics in a lot of ways. I've read the Quran, not the whole thing, but I've read like a lot of it. And yeah, He definitely reflects human characteristics like the hatred, the rage, the
Right.
jealousy, not even righteous jealousy like the Christian God, just straight up regular good old human jealousy.
And
Right.
I will
And
say, as somebody who's kind of on my faith journey towards Christianity as an agnostic, technically
Mhm.
currently, um, one of the things that I've started to ponder, because there are definitely roadblocks I've hit as I've
mhm,
learned more about
Mhm.
the faith and about the Bible, and there's certain things where I go where I still have that kind of secular gut reaction against because something will seem too harsh or something will seem like an overreaction on
Mhm.
God's part. And I think in those times I've started instead of training myself to go, hey, I disagree with that, I've trained myself to kind of reframe it as even if I don't understand it, it's bigger than me because
Mhm.
it's
right.
God's decision. So I think that's kind of the step that I'm taking. I'm going from no, I reject that to hey, because I'm human, I may not
Mhm.
understand it.
Yep.
But it's bigger than me. So who am I to judge? And
Right.
I
And
think
and the thing I think is when you look at the Christian God, right, and
Yeah.
there are things that we don't understand, and people say, well, you're just supposed to blindly accept that. No, you are open to go to God and say, I don't understand why you did this. Now,
Exactly.
you may not there are things that have happened in my life, and I'm like, God, I don't get what you're doing. And then I've looked back 10 years later and been like, oh, I get it now. Okay, I get it.
Me too. And
So
that,
he
I've only
will
been Christian
answer in
for
his
months.
time. Yeah, but the thing you have to understand is, whereas many religions teach you don't question God and what he does, and that is a sign of a lack of faith, in Christianity, you are encouraged to question God and ask
Exactly.
him, why? Help me understand, help me make this through. And so you can say, God, I don't understand the Old Testament. This seems violent and crazy and unreal. It is not a lack of faith to question him.
Exactly. It's normal to
It's
ask questions.
just
We're
faith
naturally
that you
curious
can't.
beings.
Now, I also
Right.
want to tie what you said, Terry, in terms of, and you, Raven, about kind of you're seeing things that maybe you didn't understand at the time in your lives,
Mm.
but later you realize why they were teachable moments. I think this is why one of the reasons, one of the many reasons, that the modern left rejects religion, because we have a society that wants instant
Instant
gratification,
gratification.
and I think
Yep.
that is the antithesis of the patience that's required to
Hmm.
exercise your faith and wait to reap the benefits. I think that's something
Correct.
that the modern left just psychologically is unwilling to do. And I think that's one of the big issues people have with religion nowadays too.
Yeah, I want it. Well, and it's a level of narcissism that you have to explain yourself to me,
Yeah.
right? I am the ultimate authority, and therefore you have to explain yourself to me. And so the idea that there is a God who says, you have to trust me and it's going to take time is not something that is
Mhm.
easily acceptable for narcissistic or immature human beings,
And we've
right?
become like Pavlov's dogs. I feel like
Hmm.
we're conditioned to, by the hedonistic culture we're in, to just want pleasurable sensations now.
Yeah.
And anything that takes time is people are averse to it. It's an aversion.
Or requires you to say no. Or
Yeah.
requires you to say no.
Yeah.
I'm not going to participate in this. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to. I know one of the things, and I think that, and you guys can tell me, but I feel like people who the woke religion is a very morally relative religion, right? It's what I feel like in the moment is what is right at the time, and I justify it. So the example I would give is, if I were attracted to a married man, and even though he's married, I have these feelings and they're very strong and we want to be together. So regardless of the fact that he's married, I'm still going to be with him. Whereas, I've had this conversation with women where they've talked to me and I'm like, yeah, but he's married. Yeah, but this, I don't care. He's married. And so the idea that a religion that says my feelings are not relevant. What is right, what is respectful, what is
Mhm.
safe for my other human beings and not hurting his children or his wife or whoever is the choice I'm going to make, and subjugate my feelings to what is right. And
Well,
I don't feel like that's something that woke people like to do.
it's
Yep.
absolutely a moral a relativistic belief system because just think of it. I mean, we just had the interaction on TikTok about how people said that Martin Luther King would be viewed as right wing today. The essence of wokeism is just pushing the envelope on whatever norms are present today, whether those norms are right or wrong. It's just
Right.
it's let's go outside of that and criticize everybody else who's in the norms, who's inside of
Right.
the bell curve. So that bell curve, because societies are, I guess, in a biblical sense, we're in a fallen world, so our society is never going to be ideal to what God's
No.
image may be. We're always going to have a set of norms that are different than what they should be. But to be woke is to just be outside of that and
Right.
criticize everybody who's inside of it, wherever that bell curve may be sitting at that time.
Because there should be no boundaries and I should not be questioned. I'm my own little God. And so what,
Mhm. And Terry,
and in
it's
talking
crazy
about
because
this,
Jesus was crucified for saying that. And now it's completely normal for people to call themselves gods.
right. Yeah,
That's true.
exactly. And that's true. And so I think one of the things when I look at this, one of the most horrible things that they fear and dread in wokeism is, oh, America, they're trying to make America, a Christian nationalist country. They're
You
trying,
know,
they're Christian
and
nationalists.
you know what, Terry?
Okay.
I'm so immature because I'm really not helping us. Because whenever somebody says that, I just entertain their BS. I'm like, you know what? Yeah, we
Yeah, I
are.
do.
Submit to
Yeah.
Rome. Submit to
But
Rome.
but the thing is, true Christianity would not support nationalism because
Mhm.
Jesus was not involved in politics at
He was-
all and went out of his way to avoid them, right?
mhm.
So I think when you say
You know,
Christian nationalism, it's a return to the respect of the family, a return to core values of. And when I say core, I'm talking about the Ten Commandments. I'm not
Yeah,
talking about
things
anything
that
crazy.
any
mhm,
civilized society should follow to make it on an evolutionary basis. To me, there's
mhm,
so many secular arguments for the Ten Commandments too.
mhm.
We shouldn't kill
Hmm.
each other. We shouldn't steal from each other. We shouldn't
Exactly.
lust after each other, tear families apart, and
Plus,
not reproduce.
I was say,
So
plus,
so
Chris knows my opinion about traditional marriage. So,
Well,
yes, yes.
but here's my thing. When you talk about being a Christian, I actually heard somebody talk about how the Republican platform, the conservative platform, is so repulsive. And I said, well, what's so repulsive about it? And this is the first thing they said. They're all about the nuclear family. I'm
oh, okay. Well, they love
what?
telling themselves.
And I'm like, so the nuclear family is now out of line when the nuclear family has been shown to be the most beneficial unit to raise human
Wait,
beings,
no,
Yeah.
Terry,
right?
can I tell you peak comedy to me? Peak comedy to me. My sister told me that the nuclear family is toxic. Okay, hear me out. That's not it. She has a boyfriend and 2 kids.
Hmm.
Wait,
Okay.
so you're against the nuclear family because it's toxic, but you're in a heterosexual relationship and you have
Relationship with two
okay,
kids.
okay, okay.
Well, I mean, when you look statistically, right? When we look back, and there's been tons of studies that have shown it, children raised with a mom and dad, and not in every case there's toxic, but children raised with a mom and dad perform better in school. They have less chance of getting involved in juvenile crime. They perform better as an adult. They do better. They tend to go for higher education, and they tend to perform better. The nuclear family has proven to be
Mhm.
the cornerstone of society that is successful over and over again. And now they are attacking the very cornerstone of our society as something that is sick and twisted and toxic and oppressive.
I also saw a
And
study
Mhm.
directly related to what you're saying, Terry, that in a study of same-sex households, 3 in 10 children in same-sex households identified as some letter of the LGBT community later in life. Now, even if you're totally secular and you want to say, okay, there's no, let's say you're
Mhm.
totally secular and you say there's no moral issue with being gay or transgender or
Mhm.
not. Let's just say that for a second.
Mhm.
If you did what the wokies want, which is to get rid of the nuclear family, and you replaced it all with same-sex couples, you would then have 30% of the population not able to reproduce, and
Mhm.
we die out as a species.
Exactly. And
So
also,
how?
Chris, I
Yeah.
remember, I think I told you and Terry about this. This was shocking to me because you were talking about like a secular perspective. I've met people that are completely secular, that are atheists, that think that homosexuality and transgenderism are immoral. And I'm like, oh, that, oh, that was just
yeah,
wasn't expected. That was not expected, like at all. I'm like, you're an atheist. You don't believe in God at all, the Bible, like no religion. You think it's wrong.
but they believe in
Oh,
evolution.
I'm
So,
like, so that's interesting. That, oh, I didn't expect
well,
it. It was shocking.
and I think and that goes against the traditional gender roles and the thing that we see
Mhm.
now, which to me I call the destruction of women, the ultimate misogyny in our society, which is transgenderism, but it's also this belief that motherhood and pregnancy are a disease. Pregnancy
Mhm.
is a parasite, it's a disease, it is bad for women, it is a negative thing, it is a burden, and that somehow pregnancy, and there was actually a guy on TikTok who said pregnancy is unnatural, and I'm like, I
Wait,
what? And he was a nurse. He was in the medical field.
Oh,
And
jeez.
that's
what
horrifying.
astounds me is, I think it was Scientific America came out with an article and said, so I think we all know, if you don't, women have rounder hips because we have to
Yeah.
carry children and they have to go through the birth canal, and so we also can sling our hip out and carry kids, which you see us do all the time. Something men
Mhm.
don't do as well. And they said that the reason Women evolved that way is so that because they were hunters and they could carry their their kill on their hip. That's why they evolved that way. And I'm like, okay, so evolution, and I'm not an evolutionist, but evolution believes that
I'm a theistic
species
evolutionist, but
evolve to perpetuate themselves, right?
Mhm.
Survival of the fittest. And so every species evolves so that it can survive, except human beings who have evolved to not survive, right? Because pregnancy is unnatural and women evolved to be hunters, not to carry children. They were like, it wasn't for birth. They didn't evolve that way to give birth. Okay, we evolved that way to carry. So how did we all get here? And so it even goes against nature. Wokeness is even going against nature, and it is diminishing women and their role and their place and how
Mhm.
special they are by saying that anyone can be a woman and that childbirth is unnatural. They're literally trying to destroy the species, and it's astounding to me.
So given that the woke left thinks, they believe falsely, that they're pro women, that they're for peace, love, and tolerance,
Mhm.
I guess Islam must be all of that, right? It must be all of that because they seem to
Well, I
never
got to
tag
tell you,
it.
Chris, that's not what I've
Well,
heard through the grapevine.
That's not
well,
what I'm hearing either. So I
that's not
know,
what I've
Raven.
found from my research at all.
Yes, we'd love to hear from you.
So, I mean, well, Raven, so tell us now, if you're a Christian and you don't want to be a Christian, I will pray for you. But if I'm an Islamic in a Muslim country and I don't want to be a Muslim, what are my options in some countries?
Well, death.
Oh, oh, okay.
Mhm.
Well, that
Yeah, Islam orders. Oh, I should have remembered the Quran verse. I don't know, Chris. I sent you a picture of it. It orders death of all apostates or non-believers.
Oh
You
wait,
know, the interesting thing is, a lot of Muslims will tell you, no, the Quran doesn't say to order death of non-believers. Well, it says to order death of anyone who is in opposition to Allah, and being in opposition to Allah in that context means anyone who's in opposition to Islam, or basically anyone who doesn't believe in it. So yeah, that would include atheists and
See, I
agnostics as
don't.
well.
It's funny because I don't know any even Christian nationalists who were calling to kill people who don't want to be Christians. I
Yeah,
haven't
I
heard that,
don't
and I'm
remember. Like,
pretty
I've
well,
seen
interested
actually,
in
that.
that.
hold on, Raven. You actually sent me the one verse. This is I can read it here because it's on the screen.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Um, well, this is related to Jews specifically.
Mm.
Muslims will fight and kill Jews. Jews will hide behind stones and trees, but even those will call Muslims to kill Jews. So even the stones and the trees
Yeah.
and inanimate objects will call on Muslims to kill the Jews.
You know, the funny
Which
thing
is
is,
what is
Chris, this kid in my school, he is vile for this, but you know what? It's fucked up, but it's funny because it's true. He told my Jewish friend that, like, our Jewish friend said something messed up to him, and he told him back that he hopes Muslims get his hands on him and find out he's a Jew.
wow.
Oh.
Yeah,
What
that's cold, but it's true.
What's amazing to me is that the woke culture in America will call for they want religion out of their sight, but yet they
Mhm.
are supporting groups, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, all related to the Muslim Brotherhood in Iran, who want anyone who doesn't believe what they believe dead.
So yeah,
Dead.
to go
And
back
they,
the abortion bombing
Mhm.
analogy from earlier, like you said, when bombers bomb an abortion clinic, good Christians condemn that. But when
Mhm.
terrorists commit acts of terror and violence in the name of Islam, they're actually being faithful Muslims. Is
They
that
are. They're
correct?
following the Quran
Correct.
correctly. I've read the Quran.
Right.
They're following
So
it correctly.
that's the difference. You can't say, oh, they're not good representatives of the religion. They
No, they
are
are.
following
They
what they're
are.
supposed to do.
Do I think what they're
Well, and
doing is good? No,
where's
but
the
they're following the religion.
condemnation? Yeah, and where's the condemnation? I was actually pleasantly surprised on October Summit that some leaders, uh, one or two in the Muslim world, came out and said, "Hey, we don't support this." But again, there was celebration throughout followers who
Yeah.
celebrated this. Palestinians celebrated it. Some people in Iran celebrated it. Pakistan. There were people who celebrated those things. You do not see Christians celebrate. Well, first of all, you don't see Christian. I know what's her name, what's her nuts on The View said that she couldn't tell the difference between the Taliban and Christians. So I guess she has brain damage. I don't know,
I guess she's
but
like
you
blind.
don't see Christians committing terrorist attacks. And if they did, you would see Christianity as a whole worldwide coming out and condemning that
And
and saying
when
that's wrong.
and in those rare cases where Christians do commit acts of violence, it's not coordinated efforts with the church, and
Hmm.
No.
it's not in an organized fashion. We don't have
Mm-mm.
underground cells where churches work with Christian terrorists.
No.
Exactly. And even like
No.
Chris, one of your videos, you brought up a good point because you were talking about how the person talked about pastors touching kids, and I'm like okay, and I'm like okay, well first of all teachers, public school teachers touch kids more than pastors, but regardless, on regards to that topic, and in particular, you're talking about how pastors touch kids, and how usually the first people that do anything about it are other Catholics. And I'm like, what?
Mm-hmm.
Where is this with Islam? Where is this? Where were a lot of Muslims when October 7th happened, or the Taliban? Like, where were
Yeah.
you?
Yes. And where is their condemnation to move forward? And again, I think you have to look at it when we talk about violence, not just on a large scale in terrorism, but on personal violence. And I one of the best jokes I ever heard was Jimmy Carr, who is a highly inappropriate comedian that I love.
I love Jimmy Carr,
And
by
I
the way.
love him too.
yeah, and I don't know if you saw the stand up where he told the guy, he said, he doesn't believe the guy. He said, "Are you a Christian?" And the guy goes, "Yeah." He goes, "Ooh, what are you going to do? Forgive me?" It's And I love, because he's right. What are you going to do? Forgive him? And
I'll
somebody said, "Why don't
pray
you
for
make fun
you.
of Muslims?" And he was like, "Yeah, I'm not making fun of Muslims. I don't know if you're aware of the difference, but that's the difference. As Christians, if you do something against Christianity, if you do something, or someone commits a sin or does something wrong, the first commandment of a Christian is to forgive them, right? But when you look at Islam, and you look at on an individual level, when somebody sins, the reaction is punishment and violence. Look at Iran right now, where protesters are speaking out against the government, and they have executed 60 people, and there's a man in prison. They're going to remove his eye without anesthesia as punishment, right?
How
You
just?
look at, there's still public executions, there is still public punishment, there is public stonings in some countries. And so, even not just on a national level, but even on a personal level, whereas Christianity teaches forgiveness and gentleness and the opportunity to grow, Islam teaches punishment and violence. So
Exactly.
on even whether it's an individual level or a large level, there is a difference in what and how they approach a mistake or a sin or a grievance. And I think that's interesting when you talk about, because they talk about the church doesn't like gay people. Okay, the church may not approve of homosexuality, but you don't hear about the church going out and killing gay people. However, Islam does not approve
Yeah,
of
Islam
gay
does
people.
stone them to death or throw them off
Yep.
buildings.
Yeah, or at a bare minimum, prison. Put them in
Mhm.
prison for life. Where often people part of the community are killed. And so
And
again, this goes back to it astounds me that woke people are so angry at Christianity, but so tolerant of Islam,
exactly.
which does the things when you're talking about peace. It does not. It does not follow their definition of peaceful.
Exactly. And
That
also Terry,
is
uh,
not the doctrine of
I was
Islam.
gonna say, adding on to that, it's so weird because it's like everything they accuse Christians of, Muslims are actually guilty of. But the second Muslims do it, they just turn a blind eye. And also, adding on to
Yeah.
it, that's the weird thing because it's like in regards to like same sex relations, in Christianity. Like I, as a Christian, obviously I disagree with homosexuality, but anytime I see like gay people getting thrown off buildings, like in like Iran, for example, I'm like one of the first people to speak out about that. I'm like, that's
Yep.
awful. Like I don't
That's
agree with it. That's
100% wrong.
disgusting. Why are you throwing someone off a building because of who they're
It's
attracted to?
well, it goes back to this. In Christianity, one, it's God's place to judge everybody, not
Exactly.
mine. Right? It's not my place to point out other sin and judge them, regardless whether it's lying, whether it's adultery, whatever it is. It's not my place to say to them, "This is your punishment for that." That is between them and God. My job is to love my neighbor as myself. However, in Islam, they set up themselves as the judge. You do not meet our standard, and so therefore, I am allowed to mete out justice to you. It's not
Yes.
about forgiveness, and whatever you have to do to mete out that justice is okay.
Exactly.
So, and
Exactly.
that's, and again, You're terrified. Woke people are terrified of Christian nationalism, but you're not terrified of Islamic
I
nationalism.
know my friend said so. My friend said so herself, and she put it beautifully. She was saying, when Muslims are a minority, they're victims, but when they become the majority, they show their true colors. And she had showed videos of Muslims like killing Christians, like attacking
Hmm.
Christians, like
Hmm.
brutalizing
In
them. Like, look,
Nigeria,
there you go. Yeah.
in Nigeria right now, there are Christians, hundreds of Christians being slaughtered by the Muslims in Nigeria.
Mhm.
Hundreds. Nobody marching in the street. Nobody cares. But there are hundreds of Christians being killed, and that's the other thing. Woke
You
people. I
put a
know you
lib
guys.
over there. We have a pride flag for the Muslims. They're obviously the victims there.
Right. Yeah, but I mean, tolerance, tolerance, tolerance. Well, they're killing
What?
Christians.
What are they
Instead,
tolerating?
I I don't know. But
So
but again, I think if we look at peace,
Murder.
Chris, I mean, honestly, Christianity aligns with with what woke says it wants in peace, and
yeah,
Islam is the exact opposite of it. And yet, they will still support Islam and no condemnation for what they do. None.
absolutely.
None.
So let's move on to another juicy topic. Let's move on to gender, because one of the things that wokies hate is this supposed patriarchy we live in. So let's first
Oh,
define.
I hate the patriarchy too. So
Oh yes. Oh, I don't. I benefit from it.
that's true.
So
You
so
do.
let's
Go
So
make
does
me a
define.
Rick.
sandwich, Terry.
You know what? I'm
Yeah.
sick of you two patriarching me.
Ugh, Terry, go make us a sandwich.
Hey Terry, we put
I
your
did make a
your
sandwich. I made
your
avocado
face.
toast sandwich and it was delicious.
So first of all, so let's see, what is a patriarchy? Oxford defines patriarchy as, quote, a system of society or government in which men hold the power and women are largely excluded from it. So first, let's talk about what excluded means. Now, the left will say that you're excluded just if there's 51% of men in power and 49% of women. They'll say, oh, we're being excluded. So they take any disparity in
Hmm.
representation as sign of this systemic evil exclusion by men that's on purpose to exclude women. And so that's what you hear the left screaming about all the time. So they'll perceive the smallest things as
Hmm.
evidence of evil misogyny and patriarchy. You can just say, "Hey, you look nice today," and that's misogynistic and evidence of objectification and all
Yo,
this stuff.
you
Yeah.
know what? Talking on that topic, like there was a commenter. I completely forgot this argument was even a thing because I thought like it was just common sense that it wasn't even a thing anymore. But this person really brought back up the wage gap. I was like, y'all still? That's
Oh
actually
no,
still
we've
an
gotten
argument.
okay. Rachel Maddow, calm down.
I saw
It's
that.
okay.
So given that, you know, any disparity in any way is evidence of a horrible patriarchy. I actually want to start the conversation with Islam this time because Islam, and then we'll go to Christianity.
Oh
Christianity
yeah, of
after.
I'm
course.
sorry. Are you implying that Islam is a male-dominated, male-centric religion?
Well, I want to
I'm
hear what
sorry. Are
Raven
you
has to.
implying that that Muslims don't treat women with the utmost respect?
Well, no, I want to hear what Raven has. I'm anticipating that the research Raven has done has yielded the answer that yes, it's a
Hmm.
perfectly equitable system because
Hmm.
the wokies seem to love it so much. So I
Oh,
want to
of
hear.
course.
I want to hear what Raven has to say about it because I don't know. I'm totally
Yeah.
uninformed.
Now, for starters, like in regards to the patriarchy itself, it's so weird to me because this is something that's lost to me in regards to like leftists. So anything at all, like literally the smallest thing in regards to women being slightly disadvantaged in any way, shape, or form is evidence of a brutal patriarchy. But then when you see things like more often than not, men are on the receiving end of hits in abusive relationships. That more often than not, it's men that well, not really men, little boys being abused. Like I'm like so when little boys get abused more than little girls, or men unalive themselves. Oh, sorry, I'm not on TikTok. When men commit suicide like
That's right.
at
Yeah.
higher rates than women, when
Lose custody of their children, have less visitation
if I say
rights to
they
their
have less
children.
visitation rights, when more often than not the woman gets custody of the kid. Like, is this not evidence of like a matriarchy to you? Like, is that does that not?
Well,
How does that work
it's
exactly?
also, and there's a documentary that I've recommended to people, and they've gotten very offended. And it's called The Red Pill, and it was actually shot by an extreme feminist on the men's rights movement. It's a fascinating, it goes back and forth. She shows both sides. But one of the things the guy said that really resonated with me in there is he said, think about it. When you get divorced, a father gets visitation. He said, this is my child. It is 50% of my DNA, and I'm allowed to visit.
Yeah, Terry,
Not
that's the weird
raise,
thing because when my
not be,
parents got
I can visit my own child. And it never dawned on me how wrong that would to
that
say that,
was,
right? I mean,
yeah,
you're basically taking that man out of his, you're not a consistent presence. You're a visitor.
Mhm.
And that, I mean, to say that there's this patriarchy that keeps, so the very fact that we have the power to only allow fathers to visit is astounding. The idea that fathers are given visitation of their children, even that language implies that they have been removed from that child's life as a constant presence, but rather they're a visitor. And think
Yeah.
of when you think of a visitor, that's somebody who stops by.
Yeah, even the
That's not somebody
language,
who's involved.
even the language in that
Mhm.
Yeah.
yeah.
And yet,
Because
Terry,
a visitor, I had a visitor. That's somebody unexpected who stops by. That it's not
Mhm.
someone I depend on. It's not someone I expect to see. It's not
Yeah.
somebody who is a part of my life. It's not somebody who is in a position of authority. The
Yeah,
word itself undermines the authority of that father in his child's life.
Mhm.
exactly.
Visitation. And when the guy explained that on the documentary, The Red Pill, I was like, oh my God, I never thought of how that undermines a father's role in his child's life. Because he goes from being a present, constant figure to a visitor, a
Yeah.
drop in, no authority, somebody who's not a consistent presence. And I don't just mean physically, but mentally when you say that and you
Yeah.
continue to hear it,
yeah.
that is what you're saying to that child. And that's awful.
And Terry, I was saying, the strange thing about that is, like, I can't believe I believed in, like, the concept of a patriarchy here in America for, like, so long, especially considering after my parents got divorced, like, my mom got like full custody. My dad like barely visited. And the strange thing was, like, the only reason I live with my dad now is because, like, I went to like a woke high school and I like literally begged my mom to send me to live with my dad because like it's way more conservative here and we were out in the country. So I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
so like in regards to that, I'm like, it's so wild how like when I say like my dad has visiting rights, like it really was like he was a visitor because most of the time he stopped by it was
Mm-hmm.
completely unexpected. I'm like, oh, you're here. Okay, let's hang out.
Yeah.
But like me being like the
And
innocent child I was, like it didn't quite register with me. I was just like, oh, he's here. Why is he here?
but
Okay,
when
who
you hear
cares?
that,
Let's
it's
hang out.
I'm visitation. And so you are constantly rescinding that message to the child.
Yeah.
Your father is not in a position of authority. Your father is not someone who's consistent. Your father is someone who's temporary. Your father is not a part of the, it's not family. And so the idea that we're in a patriarchal society when divorce immediately undermines the role of a father in
Exactly.
his own
Yeah.
children's lives is
And that is
absurd.
And it's
systemic. That is systemic. That's not
yes.
coincidence.
And
Yeah.
that's ridiculous
No.
because like the thing with like my dad was like, and I agree, Terry, like undermining his authority is exactly what happened because that's why I was so badly behaved because like me being a teenage boy, I eventually grew to be bigger and stronger than my mom. Once I was a teenager, I was like, I
Mm-hmm.
don't give a fuck what he has to say. I don't care. I
Mm-hmm.
was like, he don't live with me. What's he gonna do? Hit me?
Yeah. And the thing, so what you do is when you children, I mean, and this is old school psychology, but children need boundaries, and if they cannot get positive attention interaction, then they'll get negative attention and interaction. So you've taken the father who has a role of authority and leadership in the home, you've turned him into a visitor, and now you have children who are crying out for that father figure and that authority in their life,
Mm.
and you are undermining the nuclear family in every way doing that. And you are
Mm.
undermining the role and the importance of men in society because while a
Mm.
woman has to be there and is a mom, the dad, the male, is a visitor.
Exactly. And the worst part is I tell people, dads are necessary, like not for not only for
Absolutely.
not only for girls but especially for boys. Especially if he grows to be
Absolutely.
bigger and stronger than his mom. Oh no, that is a problem. And, because obviously,
No,
even looking
I
like, even if you're completely secular and you don't believe in like God or anything, like there's so many compelling arguments for the nuclear family. Because if you look at the numbers and you see like absent motherhood, it still has its effects on the child, but it's not like super significant, especially when you compare it to like absent fatherhood. The effects it has on the child are clearly way more detrimental when the father isn't present, which is exactly why men are so important to children, boys and girls.
Yeah, well, I would say
well,
I
I
used. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
go ahead, Chris.
I,
No, go
I was
ahead.
just gonna say I used to fight with my. I had a very rocky relationship with my parents for a lot of years growing up, and we had rough patches where I just fought with them about everything, a lot of harsh words. But what I realized as an adult is, even before I became a conservative, one of the things I realized was everything that I like about myself and that's made me successful, I got from one of the parents, but not the other, which is very interesting.
Mm,
Not that it's not wasn't that one parent would have this trait and the other one would be the opposite, but in terms of I could attribute my ability to communicate effectively on the job, stay calm in tough situations, and advocate for myself when I need to from my father,
Same here.
and
mhm.
my ability to read people and be able to tell when somebody needs something when they might not be saying it, read body language, reading the
Mhm.
room, that all came from my mother.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
and it's interesting. In some of these situations, like my dad would suck at the same skill. Like he wouldn't. Like both my parents were wonderful people, but I realized
Right.
everything that makes me good is for the most part, from one of my two parents. So I can imagine
Right.
if I had two moms or two dads that were a carbon copy of each other, I would be without possibly half the skills I have today in life.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I mean, and men and women are different. And I had a friend whose father was murdered when he was 7 years old. His parents had divorced, but they still. She was a nurse, and so he saw his father every day. And his father was murdered when he was 7. And he said his mom did everything she could. He grew up. He got a full college scholarship. I mean, he was successful in many ways. But he said repeatedly, growing up without a dad, I'm not sure I know how to be the kind of man I want to be. And he said his mother would tell him all the time, only a man can raise men.
Yeah.
A woman
Yeah.
can raise a boy, but only a man can raise men. And I have a nephew who never knew who his father was. And I know one of the things he has said repeatedly, he told my dad before he passed away, he's told my sister and me is, I didn't realize how important a father was till I became a part of your family. I didn't
Wow,
know. I
that's
didn't think I
powerful.
was
Wow.
missing
That
anything.
is
But
powerful.
when I came in and I met, he called him Pop. My dad became his grandfather, but he said when I came and met him, I understood what a patriarchal figure, he didn't use that word, but a father did for a family, why it was important, why. And he at first did not care for my dad because he wasn't used to being around a dad, but then he always wanted to be around and he was like 18, 19, but he wanted to talk to him. And when he went into the military, they wrote each other and they emailed and
That's
all
wonderful.
sorts of stuff
That's beautiful.
because. And he told me, he said, I didn't know. I didn't know that, I needed that example. I didn't know what I was missing until I found it. And so, again, going back to the idea of visitation, that I think is one of the first places where society started to undermine and
Yep.
diminish the role of men in the family and in our society. And it's a shame because children need both parents, but they definitely need a father.
Especially a father. Like, I'm not undermining the
Hmm.
importance of a mother, but fathers are really important.
Hmm.
Absolutely. So Raven, what is the role of the mother and father in an Islamic state?
They're against the nuclear family, right?
Oh, well,
Yeah.
obviously, of course, of course. So, in an Islamic state, basically, what you're looking at is you're looking at, the man who basically does everything, uh, not takes care of the house. Obviously, that's the woman's job. Obviously, we all know this. The woman's job is to take care of the house and cook.
Under punishment of death.
Yes, under punishment of death, of course. Now, in all seriousness, the man's role is basically to have a job, go out of the house to get groceries or take care of things. Possibly, if they have a car, if they're fortunate enough, because some of those places, yeah. If they're fortunate enough, to have a car, take care of those things, and basically to provide for the family.
And so, what happens when somebody steps outside of what their role is meant to be?
Well, in the case of men, it's actually really interesting. Now, obviously, I'm sure you have a general idea of what happens with women, but not a lot of people talk about what happens with men. It's actually really interesting.
Interesting. Okay, go for it.
So, men, basically, when they step out of line, they're still pretty harsh with men. They're not as harsh as men as they are with women, but they still can be pretty harsh with men. The interesting thing is, in some like Islamic states, I'm not going to say like it's a third gender because stupid, but they essentially like consider them like effeminate males. It's like a subsection of men, and it's crazy to me because I'm like, when I think effeminate male, I'm like, I think myself, but like in all seriousness, I'm like, when I see that, I'm like, so that can't be good because you throw gay men off of buildings, like even if they're not like
Right.
effeminate. So like, what do you do to a man when he like fails to provide for his family, have a job, put a roof over their head, provide food for them, keep his wife in line? Apparently he's effeminate and he's less of a man.
But that's important, and that's very important in that culture, right?
hmm Yeah.
The idea of power and respect is very
Wait,
important in
I
that
just
culture.
realized why the woke people love Islam.
Why?
Because they're saying that men who don't act a certain way really aren't men. And isn't that woke ideology right there?
Yep. Right there.
That
Right.
that is it.
Yeah, it
Well,
is.
even
We
I
cracked the
would think,
code. We
Yep.
cracked it.
We figured
That's
it
we
out.
figured it out. What I think is fascinating is when they talk about patriarchy. And here's another documentary I'll
Mhm.
recommend for people: is The Girl in the River. And this is a story from Pakistan. A young woman was betrothed to be married. She was 19. Her uncle came to her dad and said, "Hey, I have a guy who's like 45, 50. She should marry him." So she called her fiance's family. They said, "Come over." She came over. They got married. Her dad and uncle showed up, put their hand on the Quran, swore on the Quran, "We won't hurt you. Come and say goodbye to your mom." She did. Two adult men, grown men, beat her and kicked her and shot her in the face, and then put her in a duffel bag and threw her in the river, and she survived. What's astounding is
Oh
that
my
because that is
gosh.
considered an honor killing, that in Pakistan and other countries, but this was Pakistan, that because this is considered an honor killing, if because she survived, if she forgave them, if she had died, if her mother had forgiven them, they would not be prosecuted. Now get this: if they were prosecuted, they were looking at 5 years in prison. If she died,
Five
that's the
years.
that's
most you
more than
get
that's
for
more
an
than
honor
anyone
killing.
gets. That's more than a higher sense than anyone gets in California.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. But they don't do honor killings in California.
That's
And
true.
Terry, the interesting thing is when you told me about like also I kind of is it wrong? I kind of want to do the take again because like I laughed. Sorry, I didn't want to laugh because like it's my natural response. Like it's not like it's
No,
not because I think it's
you're
funny.
shocking.
Like
It's
I laughed
shocking.
because it's shocking. I was like, oh my
Yeah.
And
god.
and here's the thing: when I'm watching it, I'm thinking, I guess because she went off and got married with her parents. But when you talk to the dad and uncle of why they did this, their answer was she left the house without permission.
And Terry, can I add on to
They
that? Basically, like when I see that, like based on what I learned about, like Islamic society and how they essentially have like, male and female, but there's like a subcategory of men. Like, and Terry,
Mhm.
feel free to tell me if like, if I'm mistaken, but I didn't find anything about like a subcategory of women. I don't know if they're just like killed
No,
or whatever, but yeah, I don't think
no.
so. But yeah, there's like a sub.
You don't get any second chances.
Okay, but yeah, there's like a subcategory of men where basically they're like effeminate males that basically like they have no power, they have no authority, they can't take care of anything. Is that what they would have been considered had they not like in their minds had they
Yes.
not gone through with it?
Yes. In their
Mm.
mind, because he could not control his daughter and she had left the house, not ran off and got married. That was a whole different left the house. He's like, and he said he's in jail waiting for her to forgive him. And he's like, what are people going to think of me? I'm not going to have any respect. I'm a joke. I'm this
Oh,
and
okay,
that.
yeah,
And
that's
her
what he was
uncle
scared of.
too. So you want to talk about patriarchy. So in that
Mhm.
community, the community gets together, all the men get together and
Mhm.
decide whether she can press charges or has to forgive her father and uncle. So when the men, no women, men got together, they said, what is he supposed to do? When your children disobey you, when your daughter does, what else was he supposed to do? This was a good thing. This
Maybe
is
not
what
shoot her in the
she will
face.
she will forgive him. She will. And there's a part in the movie where she's getting ready to go to court and she's been told she has to do this. She cannot press charges. And she's putting on, the full, deal, covering up the full burqa. And it changed my perspective, because for a long time when I saw that, I thought, well, it's an extremely modest religion and people want to dress that way. But when she was putting that on to go to court, to be told to forgive these people, I looked at that and thought, that's not about modesty. That is literally making every woman an object, because you are
Exactly.
nothing more than eyes.
And
You
also,
cannot share
Terry,
emotion, you cannot share expression. It covers your mouth, and it's not. It is about homogenizing and objectifying women and making them nothing more that you have to consider. And so she puts this on, which completely takes away any uniqueness she
Yep.
has, and she goes into court, and she has to stand up and say. She has to stand up and say, I was wrong. I deserve this, and I forgive them and do not want to press charges.
ugh.
And they let
Also,
them go. And the judge told him, he said, swear on the Quran you won't try to kill her again. You swore on the Quran you were going to kill her the first
say, yeah,
time.
you swore on the Quran you were going to kill her the first time.
And I remember she was sitting there crying, and she says, in my heart, I don't forgive them. I'm like, you're complaining about American patriarchy? That is a patriarchal society.
And also, Tara, can I
That is
add
a
on to that? Talking
patriarchal
about American
society.
patriarchy, I've heard, when I brought up the fact that, men are, little boys are most likely to be abused more than little girls, and, men self-unalive at higher rates, men are, like, they get custody of the children less. I brought that up to a feminist, and she basically told me,
What about bricklayers, Dr. Peterson?
Yes. So what about bricklayers? Do we need equity for bricklayers?
no.
Yeah.
They don't talk about bricklayers.
I was a bricklayer for a summer, and no, we don't.
Yeah, but
At
it's
least
even
not-
funnier.
At least
I
not
totally
if
interrupted
have
you.
to
Go
do
ahead,
it.
though.
No, it's fine. But basically, the interesting thing is her response was that the patriarchy is so bad that not only does it affect women, it actually affects men. And that's what came to my mind when I thought about this, because I was like, you know what? No, she's not wrong. But she is wrong. She's completely wrong about that. But she's not wrong in this case. Patriarchies can affect men, and this is a prime example of that. Because
Yes.
Terry, you heard what you said. He said people would have thought I was a joke. They would have been embarrassed by me.
Him.
Exactly.
Yes.
Look, it was about him. The patriarchy affected him, because under that patriarchy, since men are at the very top and they're the standard, if men don't live up to that standard, they're below other men.
You get thrown off.
The patriarchy,
when
the
you're at
patriarchy does
top,
affect them as well, because they feel like they have to be at the
And
very
not
top.
only that,
when you're at the
when they
top,
did-
the only way off is falling off.
Exactly.
You're
They
gonna
don't want to
get
fall off,
Well,
which is why they do stuff.
and here's the thing. When they did the follow-up interview, when he was out, they asked him, do you regret doing this? He said, no, this has won me more respect. I'm more important. More people want to marry my daughters because they know I'm a real man. The
There
idea
it is.
that for you to be a real man, you have to kill a woman for leaving her house. You have to show that much power and control over every. That is a patriarchy, and like you said, it is that victim that nobody can question me or do what they want, or make their own decisions. And so again, this goes back to, you complain about the patriarchy in America, but I'm sorry, do you think that doesn't happen in, Gaza or in Yemen?
I've seen how they
You
treat
think
women in
things aren't
Gaza.
like that?
So,
Like, I'm sorry, you've seen that, right? How they treat women in Gaza?
Yeah, the same way they treat them in Pakistan.
Yeah.
Awful.
so
And
Terry, given how this is how bad Islam is, Christianity must be much worse, right? Since the
obviously.
Wokies hate
Yeah.
Christianity.
Mhm.
So let's
Yeah,
hear a little. Go
I
ahead.
actually have like an ankle bracelet on, and I get stunned if I wander out of the kitchen. So,
Oh, yeah. Same thing with
so
me. Mine's outside the cotton field. Your husband comes to beat me every now and then.
you got that right. No, here's the thing. It's funny because, and I'm going to blame the church for some of this. They are not good at teaching about women and celebrating them in church. But again, just because a human teaches about the Bible doesn't mean that's what it says. And
Exactly.
actually, the thing is, in the New Testament, in the Old Testament, we're New Testament believers, Christians, though. The New Testament, actually, women are very important. And I'll tell you how important they are. Women were the first evangelists and the first missionaries in the church,
Mhm.
because when Jesus rose from the dead, the first people he appeared to were
Were
women,
women.
because he knew, one, women. So Jesus dies, right?
Yeah.
And he's supposedly in the grave. He's risen, but they don't know that yet. And while the disciples are hiding because they're worried that they're going to be killed or persecuted for being followers of Jesus, the women bravely go to the grave to dress his body. Because, back then you would put spices on the body but they went, even though there were Roman soldiers at the grave that would kill them, they went anyway to beg so that they could still do something for Jesus out of loyalty. And of course, when he got there, um, sorry, I have puppies fighting. So of course, when they got there, they ran into, we believe it's an angel who said, "Why do you seek the living among the dead?" And Jesus appeared to them, and they immediately recognized him and believed.
Mhm.
And he said, "Go and tell." And they did. And keep in mind, when they went to the disciples and said, "Jesus is alive," they were like, "Nah, no, he's not." And when Jesus appeared to them, they still didn't believe who he was. So in the Bible, women are depicted and shown as being brave, as having great faith. We
Mhm.
were the first ones entrusted with the message of Christ, not
Mhm.
his disciples, women, because we were such
Mhm.
loyal and faithful followers. Women were leaders in the church. I know people like to quote Timothy, Second
Mhm.
Timothy. There's a letter where Paul says, "Hey, you need to keep these women from running their mouths in church." But one of the reasons is, one, that's a personal letter to Timothy, and second of
Yes, it
all,
is.
they were having problems with women in the church who were being inappropriate. They were trying to
Mhm.
get men to pay them to escort them to church. And so he was
Mhm.
like, "Hey, these women don't need to
Mhm.
be representing Christianity."
Mhm.
But there were women who were leaders, there were women who were prophets.
Mhm.
And there is, in the one thing that people always get stuck on is when it talks about marriage and it says, wives, submit to your husbands. Everybody
The
gets stuck on that verse, and I
Yeah,
get
the
it.
husbands
Well,
also have to.
well, the other verse of that chapter
Mhm.
is, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the
Mhm.
church.
Yeah, but
And
he
I
essentially
always
has to give
tell
himself to
people,
his wife as well. Of course, he has to,
yeah.
love her.
So
Christ loved the church.
right. So let's think about that though.
Mhm.
How much did Jesus love the church?
He
He
loved the
gave his
church,
life
but yeah, he gave his
for
life
that.
for the church. And
And
if
not
you're a
only
Catholic,
that,
he established Peter as the first pope to watch over the church.
well, but not only did he give his life for the church,
Mhm.
he stood in the church's place. If we go by justice for sin, then we should pay for our own sins.
The
And
wages for sin are death.
Jesus loved the church so much that he gave up everything in heaven. He separated himself from the Father. He came to earth and he stood in the church's place and took our punishment and our horror so that we wouldn't have to suffer. That's how much Christ loved the church. And so when God says, "Love your wife as Christ loved the church," are you kidding me? Islam doesn't teach that women are superior. What God is saying is, men, sacrifice everything to protect your wife and stand in her place so that she is protected and loved. That's powerful.
That
And
is.
so the idea that Christianity subjugates women or doesn't worship them
Mhm.
or doesn't think they should be adored or
Mhm.
loved is absolutely
Exactly.
false.
And plus,
Our
Chris, even
husbands
from
are to love us on equal par with how God loves his people. And
mhm.
that's a lot when you look at the sacrifice.
E-
So, no, Christianity does not treat women the way that Islam does, and the Bible does not teach that we are second class citizens
Exactly. And plus, even
in any
Chris,
way, shape, or
adding on
form.
to that, there's a verse in Galatians, can't think of it off the top of my head, but it says that, regardless of, your ethnicity or your gender, male or female, we're all equal as one in Christ.
Yes.
Even adding on to this, from a Catholic perspective, we don't worship, yeah, y'all, we don't worship the saints. We venerate and basically honor Mary for what she did. Think about that. Like, even
Hmm.
though Jesus God incarnate, mind you, Mary's pregnancy was still basically not in terms of what she was giving birth to. Well, who, not what, but who she was giving birth
Right.
to. But I say what, because God is like God. But in regards of not in regards to who she was giving birth to, but in terms of Jesus taking on the form of a human, it was a normal birth. Like, she went through the pain, all of
Yes.
that to give birth to our
The
Lord and Savior.
uncomfort. Yeah.
And the
And
Catholic
Jesus
Church keeps. Oh yeah,
chose
my
a
bad.
woman to bring his son into this world
Exactly.
and a
He could have
woman
just put.
to raise his son.
Exactly. He could have just
to
put
raise
Jesus on
them.
the earth. He can do anything. Luke
Exactly.
137, all things are possible with God. He could have just put Jesus
Hmm.
on the earth. But he didn't. He chose a woman to bear his child, to give birth to his
And
child,
raise
and
his
to raise his
child.
child.
So before we move
And
on
we
to the next
honor a
Absolutely.
woman in the Catholic Church. I was about to say, how is it
Hmm.
misogynistic? We literally honor a woman for what she did.
So
Hmm.
before we move on to the next topic, what the leftists really have a problem with when it comes to men and women in Christianity, it's not that women are valued less than men. Think of what woke people want. They want to just do whatever they want all the time. And
Hmm.
because the Bible does talk about how men and women are complementary, that
Hmm.
complementary categories that need each other in a positive way, because leftists reject the idea that everybody can't just do whatever they want all the time, they view that as somehow quite oppressive.
Okay,
Well,
so
not only that, they hate the idea of gender roles. And but the thing is, I had a Bible professor who talked about how that women are so unique and special that they can share the message of Christianity in a way that men can't. And he was talking about how that he grew up extremely poor. His dad had abandoned his family. His mom had diabetes and was in a wheelchair. He had a sister. He said, and we had nothing in the house, nothing. He said, and we called a church. He said, and an hour later, this woman shows up. He said, and she comes in and she unloads groceries and she helps clean the house and she cooks us dinner. And he said, and she just nurtured and took care of our family. He said, and then she left. He said, in that time, he said, I wasn't raised in church. He said, but I asked myself, why did she do that? I want to know what made her do that. He said,
mhm.
in that ministry of meeting me where I was, taking care of my mother, me, feeding us, making sure we were in a safe place. He said, brought more to draw me to God and bring me to church. He said, than any sermon I have ever heard in my life.
I
And
believe it.
that is something that is unique and special that women do. We are able to nurture and care and meet people's basic needs in a way that men don't see. And it's not a negative to men, it's because we're different.
Because you
And
are.
so women are very important in the way that we can
Mhm,
not only tell, but show God's compassion and love and his desire to meet your needs.
mhm.
And that is not something that woke people appreciate.
Nope.
You
And
know, they
also,
don't appreciate that.
the thing is, you often hear like
Yeah.
leftists say that Christianity is misogynistic because it doesn't allow women to have like those roles of pastorship or whatever. The thing is, in regards to Catholicism, we believe in keeping traditions. That's in Second Theologians 2:15, and traditionally, although women were allowed to share the good news, the first people Jesus chose after his death were women, and it also had women prophets. Mark 16:15 is not just applicable to men; it tells all Christians to share the gospel to all the creation because we're all equal in Christ. The reason is because a lot of people seem to think that, being a pastor is just evangelizing. That is not just what, being a pastor is. No. Pastors have like
No.
this special authority bestowed, if you're, I don't know if like Protestants share the same belief, but bestowed upon them by God to do things like
Hmm.
administer the sacraments. Like, for example, John the Baptist, he could administer, the sacrament of baptism. And, biblically, there were no, like, it's not a sexist thing. It's just, biblically, women were never given, that same those same things bestowed upon them by Jesus.
Well, the
Mhm.
church is supposed to be a mirror of the family. And in Christian families,
Yeah,
a father is the head of the household, and his job is to protect and be an example. And
yeah,
so the church is a mirror of that, right? So the wife's role, the pastor's wife role, is very important. And she can teach and preach and have say. I mean, my dad
yeah,
was a pastor, my mom was a pastor's wife. It does not diminish her role, but a church is supposed to mirror what God expects from the
exactly.
family,
And
which is the head of a household.
I want to
like I was
see.
saying,
I also
the
want to
reason why
see.
Catholics don't believe that is because traditionally it was not women who were chosen biblically to administer those things. They believe only men that are not even just any man, men that are specifically chosen
Mhm.
to do those things have the authority to administer those sacraments. Mhm,
I
Mhm.
want to seize on
mhm,
that term head of the household because I think leftists take that to mean
mhm.
ruthless
Yes.
dictatorship
We are not
does.
Muslims. We do not believe in a family structure in which the man holds literally all the power and can subjugate and beat his wife for any reason whatsoever.
Correct.
We believe that by a
Exactly.
man being the head of the household, he's supposed to lead by example, not lead by dictatorship or by hitting people if they disobey. He's
Well,
supposed to lead by
here's the
Exactly.
example.
thing.
That's the key. Lead by example.
and also protect.
Exactly.
But not only that, it's not about power,
Exactly.
it's about responsibility. As the head of the household, you are responsible for the safety, for the joy, for the edification of your family. It's not about, here's the thing, they see it as this is somebody who rules over people, but as the head of the household. So again, let's look at Christ as our example. Christ says he came to serve. He's a servant, a servant. The head of the
Yep.
household is the servant, right? He is there to love his wife as Christ loved the church, to sacrifice for her betterment, for her healing, for her joy, for her happiness. And that goes down to the children as well. It's not about power, it is about responsibility. You have a responsibility to set an example. You have a responsibility to love your wife as Christ loved the church. You have a responsibility to be a loving and forgiving father,
Loving, forgiving
the way
father.
God is a loving and forgiving father. It is it's not about authority. That's
Exactly.
Islam. Islam is about authority, where you shoot your daughter
Exactly.
in the face so that everybody respects you. Christianity is about forgiveness and protection and setting an example and being a loving and kind father who sacrifices, who makes the greatest sacrifices, like God did. If we look at God the Father sacrificed his son, as a Christian father, you make the greatest sacrifices for your children's betterment. So, I mean, if you were truly wanting to be a Christian father, it's a lot of responsibility and a lot of work, because everybody
Yep.
is more important than you. You are the first one to sacrifice. You're the first one to not get your way. You're the first one to not
Which is
go
weird,
without.
Terry,
You're
because
the
talking
first
about
one
that,
to
like
forgive.
I've met like a lot of Christians
And
that don't
so,
seem to understand what it means, and the man's supposed to be like supposed to be the head of the household, because they think like the man's literally like a dictator, final say, whatever he says is law. I'm like, yeah, that is a
and
problem
that's
with
a
the church.
problem
I'm
with
like,
the church. Yeah, and that's a problem, because I when I took a marriage and family class in college, I remember the professor, we got our textbook, because I went to a Christian college, and we got it out, and he said, "Yeah, we're not reading this crap." He said it has one chapter on how to be a good husband and 10 on how to be a good wife. He said, "Here's the thing: you couldn't write everything the Bible teaches about being a good husband in
no.
100 chapters. So we're going to focus on that." And that was when I really started to I understood too, because my dad did teach about the responsibility. But that is
Absolutely.
a failure of the American church. 100%. That's not a failure of God. That is that we are off base on our teaching about what we teach about men. But that the Bible does not teach that is a role
Exactly, yeah. It's
of
not
just
just a role of
authority.
like
That
the
is a
man
role of
being a dictator who
responsibility.
just says, my word is law, my word is final. It's more so about the man, leading by example, protecting everyone, being forgiving, being kind, being supportive.
You are
Exactly.
the representative God in that house, of God in that house, which means you love your wife as Christ loved the church, which is the ultimate sacrifice, and you were an example of God's love to his son, which means forgiveness,
Because God
kindness,
defined what love is in
gentleness,
First
and patience.
Corinthians, and He's
Sorry, I
all
have
of
a
those
gas.
things.
Yeah. Also, I love, and this, I had this conversation again. Republicans are lowering the marriage age in America.
But say
Islam
Islam
marries
marries
little
off like
13-year-old
12-year-olds.
girls. What are you
Calm
talking
down.
about?
Wasn't Muhammad's wife like 6?
Yeah,
As
Terry,
soon as you
us
have puberty,
Republicans, Terry, us
yeah.
Republicans are gonna have to up our game
Oh yeah.
if
Also,
we want
Chris,
to
your
Yeah.
compete
12-year-old
with
wife.
them.
We're gonna be, if we're gonna really become Christian nationalists, we're gonna start marrying off. It's just when it comes to the patriarchy, and you look at the things woke complains about, and I think especially when you talk about violence against women, you cannot go without the fact that in many Islamic countries, if a single woman is raped, she is sexually immoral and she is stoned. And I was reading today when doing research that if a married woman is raped, she's committed adultery and she's stoned.
Ooh.
And this is very common, that rape, and there's another documentary, and I can't remember the name of it, in Afghanistan, about a woman who was sexually assaulted and became pregnant, and she had to try and convince the man who raped her to marry her so that she would not go to prison.
Wait, I think
Not him.
I think I've cracked another one of the woke codes about why the woke
Okay.
people love Islam. So, leftist feminists in America, they hate due process, right?
That's true.
And it sounds like, from what you're saying, there's no due process for women.
There's not.
No, there is no due process for women. No.
So in that way,
Yeah.
Islam
Yeah,
is more
exactly.
appealing to the
And
woke
also,
Yeah.
Chris,
left
another
Exactly.
interesting thing,
than what we
like
have here.
basically a lot of people are talking about like, female circumcision in Islam, the procedure where they chop off a little girl or woman's clitoris without any sort of anesthesia. And after doing my research, I've heard a lot of Muslims say like, oh, like it's a thing, but like it's not obligatory. And after like doing my research into it, I'm like, well, according to the Quran, yeah, it is. So like if you don't practice it, you're not following the Quran correctly.
Yeah, and
No, I believe
the
it.
thing is, it is so culturally ingrained in Egypt that it's a that now you can you could girls request it and they do anesthesia and they've straightened it, but it's actually considered. I'm like, they're what? And so this is some, and I've had Muslims I've spoke with on TikTok. Oh, that doesn't happen.
Yeah,
I'm thinking, well, it does in Egypt and it does in other places. And just because, yes, but it's medical there and they use doctor. I don't care. I don't
there's
care.
no
You're
medical reason,
mutilating
there's no
women.
benefit.
You're you're
No, wait.
mutilating women.
Wait,
No
there's
benefit.
another code we just cracked. They love genital
They do.
mutilation of
They
minors.
true. That's true.
Chris, you're
See,
so
They
smart. You're
we're
cracking the
they
finally
code.
they
cracking the code piece by piece.
yeah. So I guess the patriarchy in the Muslim world is the thing is you would think that the way woke feel about peace and the way they feel about the patriarchy that they would view Islam as the enemy of the world, and yet when you tell them these things that are true and show them that's not true, they wouldn't do that. And
Yeah.
but yet they will believe Christians will do it and you have
Exactly.
no evidence of Christians doing these
And
things.
Terry,
It's
the weird thing,
it's a and again they curse Western civilization because it has these norms that it forces on people with a nuclear family, and yet they turn a blind eye or praise Middle
yeah,
Eastern because they're oppressed supposedly. And yet there is, you are going to be married and it's not your choice. Your father decides that you're
mhm,
married and who you're going to be married to. And if you don't want to do that, women are just currency there. There's a
Yeah.
problem in England. A doctor did a study where girls from Pakistan are married off to their uncles so that they can get citizenship in England, and then they will take the girls back to Pakistan, and they'll kill them because now he's gotten citizenship and they don't want her to complain or tell people. This is a huge problem in England that nobody wants to deal with because it's a cultural. Women are literally currency there. They will sell their daughters so a
Yeah.
man can come to England and then kill her. And yet you hear nothing from the woke standing up for those women. For all of we're feminists, we want to stand up for women. Nobody is interested in standing up
mhm.
for the women who are being abused by Islam.
It's like
And
it's
if
so
you
weird
say
because it's
anything, you're
like a
called
Christian says
racist, which is
anything
stupid.
about sexual immorality, that's a problem. That happening, oh no, that's not an issue.
Right.
And Terry, I was saying it's so strange
Yeah.
to me because like even adding on to what we were saying earlier about like genital mutilation, it's so strange to me how they'll like talk about like how Christians or like specifically Catholics are like so like pedophilic and they're obsessed with children, but then they'll just turn a blind eye to Islam's strange obsession with mutilating little girls' genitals. Like I'm pretty sure that's an obsession with children
Yes.
thing.
And bocce
Yeah.
boys too. And bocce boys. And where where they have whole houses that are just young
Mm,
boys who are used for sex.
mhm.
Have that's Afghanistan, and there are other places that do it. But yeah, it's astounding to me. The argument of the patriarchy makes me want to laugh when you are literally turning a blind eye to the most patriarchal
Mhm.
and brutal
Exactly.
religion
And Terry,
against women, or one of the
even
most
adding
brutal
on to that,
religions
talking about
against
like what
women.
happens, for like how women can be raped and they'll be like, considered sexually immoral or committing adultery. It's interesting to me because a lot of people like whenever I bring that up,
Mhm.
like I remember like a Muslim I was talking to in a comment section, he tried to bring up the fact that like Christianity says that like a woman has to marry her rapist, and I'm like, I don't think you quite understand the context of that verse because the
No,
man is obligated to take care of her, not to like marry her, and if he refuses, that's not going to end well for him. That's hardly
yeah,
patriarchal because a man's getting punished. I don't think that's patriarchal.
no, and
Absolutely.
there is nothing in the Bible that obligates
Yeah, no,
women to have sex, even with
celibacy
their
is actually
husbands.
encouraged in First
And
Corinthians.
yes, it is. Even and there is nothing that makes assault okay
Yeah.
or blames the women for that. As a matter of fact, the Bible says that it is better for you as a man to pluck your eye out than to lust after a woman.
So this has been a great conversation so far about patriarchy, peace and love versus violence. We have 2 more topics that we want to get to, but we're going to actually save it for a part 2. So if you guys want to tune in while we talk about LGBT rights as well as race and white supremacy and how the religions view those.
I'm pretty sure the Christians are going to lose this one. So you're going to want to tune in because I'm pretty sure this is where we blow it. And
You're gonna wanna
Islam and
tune
Middle
in.
Eastern, civilization kicks Christianity and Western civilizations.
Yeah.
But
Well,
this
no,
is,
except
this
for
is
like
where
their
it's gonna
obsession
happen,
with like
Chris,
white
I believe.
women. That's like the
Things are really
only
getting heated
area.
up.
Okay, my bad.
Part two. They're not going to tune in
shut
if you
up.
tell them everything now.
Okay, guys, we'll see you soon. We'll see you on the next part.